Calaroga Shark Media.
Hey there, I'm Johnny Mac, and on Saturdays this summer I'm doing deeper dives on single topics. Today let's talk a little about Joe Rogan. And the thing that gets lost in every conversation about Joe Rogan is that he's a comedian. Not was a comedian, is a comedian. Now you might not think he's the best comedian, maybe he's not, but he's a comedian. The way he runs the podcast, the way he talks to guests, the way he thinks about things, the way he's built the whole thing, it's all shaped by being a comedian. And what I mean by that is his whole career was shaped by being in rooms where the only thing that matters is whether something's actually interesting or actually funny. You can't fully understand the Joe Rogan Experience without understanding that the person at the center of the Joe Rogan Experience thinks like a comedian, which means he thinks about authenticity the way most media executives think about ratings, which is to say it's the only metric that actually matters to him. And a lot of times those two things are in opposition. TV never quite figured out what to do with Rogan. He did news radio. Remember that? Yeah. It's a funny show. People remember it fondly. He was good in it. But he's not the thing you think about when you think about news radio. He was a comedian doing TV rather than a TV person. Then he did Fear Factor. It's its own strange chapter. A show that was watched by tens of millions of people. It made him a household name in a very specific way. Fear Factor Joe Rogan and Joe Rogan Experience Joe Rogan are the same person if you look closely enough, but the mainstream audience that knew him from Fear Factor had no reason to think he was going to become the most influential media property of the next 2 decades. Joe Rogan was the guy who made people eat bugs.
This is so wrong.
Come on, this is for your charity. It might be a little bitter, but go for it. It's for your charity.
What does it taste like? Yeah, how's
Plug
it
your nose. Don't tell us what it tastes like.
What they missed in all that was Joe Rogan's genuine intellectual curiosity. I was recently listening to the episode with Michelle Thaler, and at points I was wondering if Joe had checked out, and then I realized, no, he was just taking it all in as they talked about space and science. It was a great episode.
If the Earth was the dot of an I in a book, in regular print, that the Milky Way galaxy would be as large as the Earth itself.
Actually a little bigger. Yeah, so, I mean, the thing is, this is an interesting thing about science communication. If the sun were the size of a dot of an eye, and you gotta remember, you can fit 1 million Earths inside the sun. Right? This is a huge thing. So if that's the size of a dot of an eye on text, then the galaxy would be the size of the Earth. That's when people's eyes get big and people respond to it.
So it's not just the Earth, it's the sun. So if the sun was the dot of an eye.
Yes, that's right. So let's make this clear. So if the sun were the size of a dot of an eye on a page of text, so you could fit 1 million Earths inside that dot of an eye, then the Milky Way galaxy would be bigger than the Earth. Yeah, I think
so if the Earth was the dot of an eye, then how big is the Milky Way galaxy? Because the sun is how many millions Earths?
Volume-wise, you could fit over 1 million Earths inside the sun. Yeah, yeah. The sun is about 800,000 miles across. You could fit about 110 Earths across it, the diameter.
We do those things where you show the differences between our sun and different stars, and immense stars, and you go bigger and bigger and bigger, and you get to the point where you're like, this is not working. I can't process this. It's too kooky.
There's nobody that can process it.
The Joe Rogan Experience, episode number 1. Guest Brian Redban. December 24th, 2009. What an interesting time to launch a show, Christmas Eve. Now, 2009 is early. We only got iPhones in 2007, and if you were into podcasts in those early days, and I was, you couldn't actually download a podcast to your phone. You had to get it on your laptop and then connect your phone with a cord to the laptop and move some podcasts over. So back in those early days when I was listening to things like this or Hardwick, Nerdist, you had to really do it.
Start broadcast, and then
Update to Twitter.
Update to Twitter. And then I always like to watch my own channel. So let's go to your own channel. So you can see what the chat is. And then update your internet tonight.
Update my internet?
Or go to the faster one.
Yeah, right.
You're going to get addicted to... Oh, nice colors.
Pretty.
So 2009 is pretty early to start a podcast, and a lot of the people that really were the big names did start early. That's not to take away from them, but there's obviously an advantage to being an early adopter. Marin definitely was an early adopter. Again, not taking away from anyone. So 2009, the idea that a podcast could be a primary media property that could compete with TV or radio, ad dollars. Yeah, we couldn't even do, it's called dynamic insertion. Now, if you're in, I don't know, If you're listening in Portugal, I could serve you local ads targeted at you in Portugal. Back in the day, and I started in podcasting in 2015, which was kind of the start of round 2. The OGs give us a lot of crap for getting in late, but here 11 years later, I feel like I got in early. Anyway, you couldn't do dynamic insertion advertising. You had to actually bake the ads in. But Rogan wasn't thinking about a media company. He was thinking about it as a comedian who wanted to have long conversations with interesting people and had figured out a way to record and distribute those conversations for free. The early episodes of the Joe Rogan Experience are a document of someone figuring out a format in real time. They're loose. They have a feeling of someone who's experimenting rather than executing. Early guests are people who were part of the LA comedy ecosystem that Rogan was part of. The early episodes have the energy of a thing that doesn't yet know where it's going, where nobody's performing for an audience because the audience is still smart enough that performing for it would feel absurd. Now, if you look back at who Rogan had on and when, you can get a map of where the culture was heading before the mainstream caught up. He had Elon Musk on in 2018, before Musk had become the figure he is now. A cool scientist guy that's going to build a Mars base with electric cars, that guy, yeah.
Yes, I think that one of the issues with social media, it's been pointed out by many people, is that I think maybe particularly Instagram, people look like they have a much better life than they really do.
Right.
So
by design.
Yeah, people are posting pictures of when they're really happy. They're modifying those pictures to be better looking. Even if they're not modifying the pictures, they're at least selecting the pictures for the best lighting, the best angle. So people basically seem they're way better looking than they basically really are.
Right.
And they're way happier seeming than they really are. So if you look at everyone on Instagram, you might think, man, they're all these happy, beautiful people, and I'm not that good looking, and I'm not happy.
That conversation got watched and shared in a way that a TV interview never would have because it was 3 hours long, and Rogan let Musk be weird and interesting instead of trying to fit him into a 7-minute window. Rogan had on Bernie Sanders. He had on Kanye. He had scientists, fighters, comedians, authors, conspiracy theorists, doctors who disagreed with other doctors, and he treated all of them more or less the same way, which is to say he was genuinely curious about what they thought and asked follow-up questions and didn't try to trap anyone to score points. That format, long, curious, non-adversarial, was unusual in the media in the early 2010s, still unusual today. Cable news had trained everyone to expect conflict and interruption. Talk shows were in 7-minute segments. Even NPR had, that NPR kind of air to it that shaped how the questions got asked and how you answered. Rogan didn't have any of that. He had a comedian's framework, which is what's interesting here and how do we get to it? Those are different questions than what a journalist asks, and they produce different conversations. And part of the audience that found the Joe Rogan Experience did so because they were hungry for that kind of conversation and weren't finding it anywhere else. Personally, it's why I love the show. Joe is genuinely curious. Sometimes I don't agree with anything he's saying or what the guest is saying, but I always find the conversations interesting to listen to because they're calm. Let's talk about the comedians. When Joe Rogan had Bill Burr on, those conversations functioned as a masterclass in how comedians think about their work. Same with Louis C.K., same with Chappelle. They weren't promotional appearances. The guests were there to talk about comedy and the road, what it's like to do the thing they do, and they talked for as long as the conversation was interesting. By 2015 or so, the podcast was the biggest in the world by any meaningful measurement, still considered to be the #1 podcast. The advertising model was working. Rogan was doing host-read ads. Advertisers were paying for them because the audience was enormous and loyal in a way that podcast audiences tend to be. But the mainstream media was still condescending, treating the Joe Rogan Experience as a curiosity, still not reckoning with the fact that more people were listening to Rogan every week than were watching most cable news programs. The industry was still writing think pieces about whether or not podcasts were a real medium. Comedians understood what Joe had built. A Rogan appearance moved tickets in a way that a late-night appearance no longer did. Getting on Rogan was the thing, not getting on Conan or Kimmel or Comedy Central. Rogan. Some of the comedians who arguably Joe made their career: Segura, Kreischer, Andrew Schultz, Shane Gillis. Then the Spotify deal in 2020, $100 million, later reported to be closer to $200 million for exclusive rights to the Joe Rogan Experience. Suddenly, the media was like, hey, wait, what? A guy's talking to people in a studio is worth $200 million to Spotify? And don't forget, Spotify is a company that has access to data about podcast listening and made that deal with full information about what they were buying. Rogan was 11 years in at that point. It wasn't a bet on what he might become. It was an acknowledgement of what he already was. The largest and most influential audio media property in the world, built without a network, without a studio, without a development deal, no big company behind it, just a comedian who wanted to have conversations with interesting people and figured out how to distribute them. That deal did create some friction. People would listen to the podcast on their regular app, now had to listen to it on Spotify. That's when I started listening a little less because I don't love the Spotify app. Also, the show was moved off YouTube at that point, so there's some audio disruption. I know personally, if I heard enough buzz on an episode, I'd go listen to it on Spotify. But, for the most part, I skipped a lot of those years. Then COVID comes along and some controversies. Neil Young pulled his music from Spotify to protest Joe Rogan's COVID episodes. That became a whole cultural moment in early 2022. There were calls for Spotify to drop Rogan entirely. Spotify stock dropped. Spotify put a content advisory on some episodes. They issued a statement that kept the deal intact. The cultural pressure that was supposed to make Rogan radioactive had basically no effect on the one thing Spotify cared about, which was whether or not people kept pressing play. Eventually, the Spotify deal was redone, so now you can now listen to the show on any app or on YouTube, just like we did in olden times. And then there's the political aspect to this. Joe always had on political guests, for example, Bernie Sanders in 2020. Politicians realized they could reach young men who don't watch cable news, who don't read political newspapers. By 2024, the show had become something that presidential campaigns felt they needed to engage with. At least one of them did. Donald Trump came on in October 2024, sat with Rogan for 3 hours. No prepared questions, no handler, no 7-minute segments, just Rogan and Trump talking the way Rogan talks to everyone, with genuine curiosity and without the adversarial framework that defines most political interviews.
It was really like two different lives. I had a very wonderful life, but I wanted to do this. The Apprentice was still going very strong. We had 12 seasons, and we had actually 14 seasons, 12 years over. They had a couple of them.
Well, they canceled The Apprentice when you were running for president, correct?
No, they had Arnold Schwarzenegger do it. I was involved in that, and I had enough of it, and we did great. It was doing great, but they wanted me to stay. They all came to see me. They said, we're going to give you a contract. They wanted to extend my contract. Mark Burnett is a great guy. Then they wanted to extend the contract. Mark said, you're crazy. Don't run. No. Nobody gives up primetime, they said. It's one of those little things, which is probably true.
Nobody gives up primetime, though, for being president?
For running against 20 some odd people, it turned out to be 18 professional people, mostly politicians.
The episode got something like 40 million views in the first few days. Meanwhile, Kamala Harris's campaign made the decision not to go on Rogan. In October of 2025, Harris told the Diary of a CEO podcast, I wanted to do Joe Rogan's show, and there were a lot of games being played, but I wanted to do Joe Rogan's show. There was some claim in a book that the Harris campaign had rearranged her schedule for a possible appearance on the show, but we're told that Joe was taking a personal day, which turned out to be the same day Rogan interviewed Trump. Rogan fired back, saying Harris and her team never agreed to an appearance on the podcast. Joe also said that the Harris team wanted him to travel from Austin to New York to do the interview. On the Joe Rogan Experience, Joe said he wanted to do Trump and Harris on the same day. That was my goal. I even offered to do it late that same night. The night Trump came on, I'm like, what if we do her while she's in Houston if she came here? But no one ever committed to doing it. This is really important because they keep pretending like I lied. Harris said on a subsequent podcast appearance that she wanted to go on Rogan's show but was advised not to because they assumed, as it turned out to be correct, as says the quote, that he was supporting Trump and that it would not be a productive piece for me. But just like when I went on Fox News with Brent Baer, my perspective was they might have their bias, but there are people who listen who are open-minded, and I'm going to go there and give them a chance to get to know me and make my case to them. So that was my perspective on Joe Rogan, just like it was my perspective on Fox. She concluded of the topic, I definitely regret that we didn't do it. You start a podcast in 2009 because you want to talk to your comedian friends for 3 hours. 15 years later, presidential campaigns are making strategic decisions about whether or not to appear on your show. Joe Rogan Experience, still number one. You can comment on this episode in the Facebook group, Daily Comedy News Podcast Group, or on Spotify. Comments are open. Also, listen to this program on Spotify, become a follower, and turn on notifications so you never miss an episode. I'll be back tomorrow with a normal episode of Daily Comedy News. Enjoy the rest of your day.